next we have Mobilizing the Next Women's Movement inside global corporations. And moderating will be Erin Vilardi. She's the founder of Vote, Run, Lead and co-author of Athena Core 10 of Barnard College. We also have Joanna Barsh, who is Director Emeritus at McKinsey & Company, as well as a best-selling author. And we have Geraldine Moriba. She's the VP of Diversity and Inclusion at CNN Worldwide. Please join me in welcoming them. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm so excited about this conversation, the next women's movement inside of global corporations. Is that an oxymoron? Is that actually happening? And over the next 25 minutes, we're going to have that conversation about companies and what they can do to advance women's leadership and what women need to get ahead. So I want to start with Joanna, who is a sort of resident expert, author of Centered Leadership, and the guru, if you will, on this topic. What is the history? When we talk about movements, we talk about the past and how the past informs what we're doing in the future. When I think of women in corporations in the past, I think of the shoulder pads and the sneakers and the working girl. You know, what's happened from then till now? Has there been progress made? Where is it happening?
So the biggest progress of all, I have to say I'm 5 feet tall. My feet reach the floor in this chair. So adapting to women. There is a huge wave. It's happening worldwide, but it's not necessarily happening in every company or in your company.
Right.
And what this is about is us linking together across companies, across industries, across fields to say we want first basic rights for women, then we want to have our vote heard, we want to have our voices heard, and yes, we can lead. And when women lead, for the most part, we lead differently. So that's what I think is happening in the current era. It's the most exciting thing of all, that we can shape the way companies operate if we're willing to do it.
And Geraldine, you've been in the media for 25 years, every network, ABC, NBC, 14 years now with CNN. What have
22.
22, all right. What adaptations have been made? What have you seen in that time period?
I don't know that I've seen a lot change, unfortunately. I've been in the industry long enough to have been able to make observations, and I have to say the same patterns that I saw when I started in Canada in radio, it's pretty similar now. I remember working in a newsroom in Canada for a show called As It Happens. It was my first job in the industry, and our executive producer was determined to increase, she was a woman, and she was determined to increase the number of stories. It was a daily program that were told by women, female voices, and about women. And on our daily editorial board, she would write a female symbol beside every story that included a woman. She was the only person at CBC that would do that. And so consequently, her show had more female voices, and there was a balance. I've been in the industry 20 years. People don't do that kind of thing. They're not necessarily monitoring gender or ethnicity or any other category that closely, because most of the time they're just trying to make air.
But the fact is that women are now over half the entry positions across all industries in professional jobs, and we're about 37% of the middle managers. So
even less when you get to the top.
And much less when you get all the way to the top. It's, as we all know, under 5%. But we're in the belly of the python, if you would. So there is room. What's not happening is mindsets which take 20, 30 years to shift. What you're experiencing is the incredible frustration that you're in it and you don't see the tangible shift. But if you go back 50 years, somebody just sent me the set of advertisements. I don't know if you've seen that. It's moving around the world of Twitter. All the advertisements from the 50s and 60s. They're funny as hell.
Yeah, they're hilarious.
Yeah, it's
but they
like,
were real.
What is a woman good for? Right. Cooking, taking care of babies, occasional sex if it's not too prurient. For that, you go elsewhere. And, gee, I got a vacuum cleaner for Christmas. What a happy girl I am. So that's what it's
Full
about.
face of makeup.
So in 50 years, when we look at today, not that I'll be alive, but when we look at today, will you feel differently?
I mean, I have data. I mean, I can tell you there's There are several organizations across the country and the world that study women.
Right.
And study women in media. And specifically in the news industry, if we look at newspapers and magazines, women are doing stories that we sort of quietly call pink stories. They have the pink beat. And those topics tend to be family, gender, style, food, lifestyle, entertainment, recreation. And then the big hard news stories go to men. And the numbers are staggering. 90% of stories on economy are produced or reported by men. Global politics, social action, and environment, national politics. And then the softer stories go to women. I mean, there is and that has been the way.
Right.
These numbers were exactly the same 20 years ago.
So how do we change that? And what happens when we get not only to 50% women in those decision-making positions, but when we are leading at 80% female leadership? What, Joanna, will we see as the change? What's the end game to this movement?
So if you step back, the woman that you mentioned is pretty special, because most of the women who
Her name is Jennifer Levine.
Jennifer Levine is a pretty special lady. If you're in the audience, we love you. Most of the women who make it to the top are making it in a man's game.
Right.
So they may not, in fact, behave very nicely to other women, because that's not what it took them to get to the top. When you get enough women moving up in a swell, and you see that in several companies, probably not in media, but you'll see it in some financial companies, in some women's companies, consumer companies, beauty companies, you'll see more and more women moving. And then you end up with more of a feminine archetype at the top, which is not that it's just about cooking, cleaning, etc., and making babies. It's actually about meaning, leading with purpose. It's about community, emotions in the workplace, both love and positive emotions, as well as acknowledgement and acceptance that we all have fear. It's about positive energy and getting everybody to have their voices heard. When women and men who lead like that, we call it centered leadership, when they get to the top, here's what happens. You shift the way you think about capitalism.
Whoa, whoa.
You shift from short-term profits and the two guys at the top take all the money to a broader explanation of value for all of the stakeholders, for your customers, for your employees, for the community. You're not scorching the earth in the communities in which you operate, and for your shareholders. But it's actually long-term value that you're creating, not short-term value. That's a huge shift in business. And so as far as I'm concerned, let's bring it on.
So Geraldine, you're the head of diversity and inclusion at CNN. How do you make that shift? What does the daily grind look like in trying to get generations of men? Because I think you'll hear from John Grzema tomorrow on how the millennial difference, I think younger men might be more open to that kind of centered leadership. But the folks in charge are 55 plus and have been doing this for a long time. You're charged with that role of making these kind of shifts. What is it like? Tell us the truth.
Well, is anybody listening?
Is this recording?
What I'll say is CNN is like all media agent companies and like a lot of corporations in the country. I mean, just this week, there was data that was released on Google.
Yep.
And 2 years ago, I was leading a long-form team, and we were doing documentaries. And the documentary we did was specifically on Silicon Valley and on race and gender. And 2 years ago, we had data that showed that the numbers were skewed. You had to be white and male, and a certain kind of white male to succeed, and to not just succeed, but to get access, to get funding, to get jobs. And,
That's true.
And finally, we're starting to see data support that.
Right.
What's happening at Google is true for all of Silicon Valley, which is true for corporate America. So CNN is a part of that culture. There definitely is still a culture of pattern matching, where people hire and recruit people who they're comfortable with, who they're most like, and what we have to do is break those barriers. And how do you do that? And that's your question. Is through everything from being a constant foreign, but also through culture changes. I've been in this role a short period of time, and we're starting to roll out things within the company that we hope will help people think more broadly and become more self-conscious. And it's everything from leadership training to offering women opportunities to attend conferences like this, to having conversations in individual newsrooms specifically about their own staff and who's there and when you're hiring, and when they're hiring, making sure that we're filling those pipelines with candidates who are qualified but they're diverse.
Yeah.
So there are multiple ways to approach this. There isn't one single approach. And the other thing is, I mean, my job isn't just to make sure that our newsroom reflects the nation. It's also that our content reflects the nation, which is incredibly critical. And I actually made a list just today.
Wait, before we get to that, I want to continue on this sort of these diversity initiatives inside of companies, because that's what we do at the Athena Center. But we often find that sometimes these programs are kind of, the good intentions are there, but they're shaped on, send these women to this program and then they're going to come back better negotiators. And we heard from Sally Krawcheck this morning, we're already good at negotiating. Send these women off and we'll fix them at these leadership conferences. Actually, we don't need to be fixed. We're fantastic, right? What we need is the culture to say, my level of aggression or ambition or what you want to call it isn't rewarded in the same way that a man's is. So how do we get managers to think differently about how women's ambitions?
If I may?
Yeah, please.
That's learned behavior. It means that women who get into position of leadership have to reach back and help. Men get ahead because they do that intuitively. And just to tell a short story, I remember when I had my first child, my son, who, and at that point I was on the fast track. I was crashing stories, we call it crashing, every day, just doing one story after another. I was definitely on the fast track, and then I got pregnant and was so excited about that, and immediately started worrying that this might impact my career. And I remember having my son, everything was fine, and then cutting my maternity leave short. My mom moved in with us temporarily. I had my backup plan, and going back to the office, ready to jump back on, because I didn't want to. I wanted to have it all. I wanted my family, and I wanted my career. And going back to work, and immediately getting these stories that we, in the newsroom, we called family focus stories. I'd never, ever worked on a story like that. And I got one, then I got two. When I got the third one, I marched into my boss's office and said, with due respect, I was on the fast track when I left, and I came back and you put me on the mommy
Weeks
track.
later, mind you. Not very long.
But it's more than just up to the individual woman.
It's
when
somebody
we
above
want
you.
to create culture change, at McKinsey we've done enough research on other kinds of transformations that applies here, which is the leadership has to be fully committed, leading, role modeling, signaling. There needs to be a compelling story that is told to everybody over and over again, and you don't hear that. What you really find in most companies is that the CEO shows up for the first 5 minutes, says, have a great meeting, I'm too busy to actually stay for the day, so I'm going to go do something else, more important for shareholder value. Then you also need all of the systems to reinforce, not just the talent HR systems. Are we, in fact, meeting as a top team and talking about this? Are we having budget meetings where we're thinking about the monies that are going towards this? Are we having client meetings where we're bringing women and positioning them? Every piece of the organization needs to make it happen, and then you get to the women themselves and their managers. Because I think the biggest issue in these companies, as my husband says, who are the men? I see there must be one or two in the audience. Poor guys. First of all, thank you for coming. But nonetheless, which man is going to say, I make $1 million a year, but actually, Erin, why don't you sit in my seat because I don't need to make that money. You can sit there. Nobody's going to do that. They're just going to say, back off, lady. And that's happening in the middle layer. That's not happening at the top because those guys are secure.
And when we do these trainings, the women know that. They call that the permafrost, the kind of frozen layer. How do we use diversity and inclusion initiatives to fix those guys, to use the same term. How do we get them thinking differently?
It's more than the initiatives, though. It really is a culture change. It means when you're in a boardroom, so we have daily editorial meetings, when you're in a boardroom, that the person who's at the head of the table is consciously making sure that different kinds of people speak. And that means, because I see this in our editorial meetings all the time, men dominate the meeting.
Right.
They speak up, they don't raise their hand. Like
They interrupt.
I used to raise my hand,
Right.
I now speak. You have to learn this kind of behavior, but sometimes you need to be told it's okay to do that. They're doing it, and you can do it too.
Right, right. What tips do you have for women? I mean, I think the lean-in conversation helped us think about sort of sitting at the table in a new way. What are some strategies that you've seen work? Give us an example of a fantastic woman, another one, who gets inside that meeting and says, when I said that idea, it was great. This is what I meant when I said XYZ before John said XYZ. How do we get folks to not be the woman who's constantly talking about other women, or the woman who, or the person of color who's constantly advocating for other people of color? We don't want to be boxed in there. We also want to be recognized for our talents. So how do we kind of do that?
The biggest lever is sponsorship. If I look at, there's a woman I'm very proud of at McKinsey who now runs our New York office. Her name is Liz. I was one of Liz's sponsors. There was a lineup of people fighting to sponsor Liz.
Nice.
Men and women. And I asked myself why. Yeah, she's Ivy League trained. She does really good work. She's easy to get along with. Everybody liked her. Remember the book, What Works for Women at Work? We can be likable. She's also tough.
Yeah.
So people say, watch out, Liz has a hammer. She will use it if she needs to. But she built a peer group and a sponsorship group at the top. And frankly, every step of the way, she did it with a community. She was never alone. And I think women who are, and she's probably about 10, 15 years behind me, I'm 61, so she's got to be mid-40s. I think even the women who are coming in, if you're in your 30s, it's just surround yourself with people. You may not have a sponsor today, but over time, all the people the community you're moving in,
Right.
someone will sponsor you when you do good work.
And what do? Do you say, will you be my sponsor? No, you don't go up. How do you create those kind of relationships so that you're building these kind of networks of trust and communities of trust at your job?
Well, what I'll say is sponsors are both genders.
Yes.
Sponsors are not necessarily, they don't necessarily look like you.
Right.
They don't necessarily like all the things you like. Sponsors are people who trust you and are willing to put something out on, take a chance on you because it's their reputation. And the sponsor is someone who's going to make a call. And those are relationships that happen over time. It means that you not only have to perform really well, but your reputation
Yep.
has to be solid, and that your image, the way people perceive you, is also positive. And if you've got all those things aligned, then people will take a chance and become your sponsor.
Right.
And it is about relationship building.
Right.
And I will say that over the length of my career, my sponsors have been both male and female, and all races as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And in fact, your point that it takes time, I'd love to underscore. I just ran a workshop with a bunch of women who had been in an all-day workshop on connecting and then said, we really didn't get it, can you come back? And I thought, oh damn, I have done the worst job in the world, right? I wrote a book and I go to an all-day workshop and they don't get it. So something's wrong with me since they're really smart people. And I show up and here's what I learned. They thought that to get a sponsor, you have to leave the theater and get one, maybe by next week. Number two, they thought it takes at least 10, probably 20 more hours a week.
Right.
And I don't have that time, particularly if I have kids. And then the third thing they thought is, if I don't do it, I am screwed. So now I'm in a bind. And as we talked, we said, by the way, it's 2 to 3 years, maybe longer, depending on your tenure. It probably is 1 hour more a week. It's probably not more than that. If
Right.
it is more than that, something's wrong, we have to fix it. And if you don't do it, it's okay. You may not aspire to be the CEO of the company.
That's right.
That's okay too. Just find out what's important to you and start to work towards it in small steps.
this is something we didn't discuss prior to the panel, but that brings up an interesting point. A lot of this energy around women's leadership, what if you don't want to be the CEO, right? What if you just want to go to work from 9 to 5 and have a lovely 5 to 9 life afterwards and wonderful weekends, and your aspirations are not to be, you know, the superwoman, the super mom. You just want to be a regular gal collecting a lovely paycheck and treated fairly at work. How do we, is there something happening in the next, 5 to 10 years where we're seeing this push for women leaders? And some of us are saying, I'm not interested in being a leader. I'm interested in being what I call a GSD, or a get shit doner, you know. And we need those folks too. So how do we, is there something we should be aware of as we're looking into the future? Is it too much emphasis on this superwoman? I think of some of the women on these panels, it's like, God, I don't want to do that.
I'm not so ready. I don't want to sit at the table.
Yeah. You know, is that something, I think also generationally we're seeing both younger men and women.
Yeah, but I don't think it's just about getting to the CEO level. I mean, certainly if you're doing the play Annie, there's one Annie, right? They're not 5 people through the play
Well, they're
rotating.
understudies.
No, they're not rotating during the performance. Right. There's one CEO.
Right.
I don't think that the message that we have here is it's one person. It's about excellence. It's about being the best you can be at whatever level you decide you want to reach.
Right.
And having the opportunity to get there.
Right. And not feeling that it's being done to you, that you know what you want, and you are the owner of your own experience and your own future. So for me, that's the biggest deal here. So thank you. So many of us say, oh my God, stuff's happening. I teach these women at every level, but in particularly when you're in your 30s, it's pretty damn intimidating, and it's hard to say, I am in charge of my experience. I may not get the outcome I want, but I can have the feelings, the attitude, the thoughts, and the actions. And once you have that, you're free. So you can be free to be excellent.
That's awesome. A lot of the work we do when we survey the women who come through the trainings, about 40% of them actually don't know what they want. So to work towards that path, whether it is to be CEO or just the next level up, or to have flex time, that there isn't that goal setting. So as we will take that on and sort of everyone get back to their 5-year plan, it's critical. How do we hold?
Well, I'm going to ask you a question that I'd love to hear. I don't think men sit around going, I don't know what I want. What do I want? You know, let's get together. Yeah. And my husband...
Should they?
My husband was a trader and a scientist, and he's a really good guy, but he's a really tough ex-paratrooper kind of guy. And he says, for God's sakes, it's obvious what you want. You want to win. And so if there's a bear, you want to run faster than your friend. So, Gerald, what's the answer?
I was going to say it's not only about that question. It's also women, when we apply for jobs, there's study after study that shows that when we look at the list of criteria for a job, since there are 10 different criteria, we'll have 6 and say we don't have enough, we need 10.
Right.
Men will look at 6 and say, yeah, that's mine. I can do this.
Right. And my husband will say, why do you need any? Because you have 3 weeks to learn the whole thing.
Okay,
so there are, again, it's culture. There are differences.
Yeah, and as we sort of unlearn, I think, a lot of behavior that as young women we are taught. It's in your book, it's in Lean In. I don't want to get stuck, though, on sort of how we can adjust, right? We're working on it. We're all here at this conference. How can we hold corporations' feet to the fire? Yeah. That's the question. I don't think that there is a women's movement inside.
So we keep talking about a lean-in culture. There should be a speak-up culture. Like, we all observe these things, and we just kind of quietly make a note to myself.
Yep.
Did you see that? And we quietly talk to each other, and that's not right.
Right.
But we're not speaking up. And if more of us collectively spoke up, we would be heard. We would be heard for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so speak up, John.
I'm about to write a note to somebody, and it's along those lines of sharing disappointment. So sharing disappointment that we all want the same thing. I don't think the people at the top don't want talent to succeed and flow. What is happening is the current is very, very fast against us. And I'd love to do this new piece of research around, let's talk about what these barriers are, because McKinsey Women Matter did a piece that we presented last October, and what it says is men don't see the barriers. Men don't think it's any harder for women.
Right.
Women see all the barriers, and it's like, am I nuts? Am I on drugs? How come I'm the only one who says it's so hard to get to the next level?
Right.
It's 2 to 3 times harder for women than for men at every step of the, and if you took women of color, I would imagine the data, it's hard to get that data, it would be even harder. There are real obstacles around collective mindsets. I just don't think a woman would be good in that job. Or around, she just doesn't have the right experience, or she's too emotional, none of which is true. That's all a belief. So put individual beliefs aside, collective beliefs are like a giant wall that needs to come down.
I was in an editorial meeting yesterday, and we had a whole conversation about Hillary's hair. And
Hillary's hair does
example.
not make legislation.
Right, exactly that. Men in the room said, well, what's the big deal? Like, so we're writing about her hair, we're talking about her hair. And the women were saying, no, because if she was a man, you wouldn't be talking about her hair on the cover of this book. And then the guy said, well, we talked about...
John Edwards, remember his sleek hair?
And I said, but that was...
That's not equality.
But we needed to have women in that room speaking up. But we had to be there to vocalize that opinion as well, which is why diversity matters, and which is why you do need to have women in these conversations at every corporate level.
Yes.
We've got 30 seconds. Give us some companies that are doing this really well so that we can take back to some of our companies that might not be doing this well and say, hey, look at what McKinsey's doing. I know Deloitte has been a leader in this for a while.
I wouldn't say McKinsey's a leader in this. I would say McKinsey is on the same journey as everybody else. There are some women's companies who can truly give you phenomenal numbers. The companies like L'Oreal, for example, which is devoted to women's beauty, for goodness sakes. Even companies like Walmart. Walmart now has 31% of its officers are women. And yes, they're a huge company and they should do more. But I actually went there to talk to them and met the CIO, who happens to be a woman. So there are 2 great companies right there. There are some financial companies who would shoot me if I told you who they are, but they're out there. If you're a woman looking for a job, just ask the question, how many women are on this board?
That's right.
How many women are on the top team? And if the answer is none, don't go there.
And see, I'm from a different school. If we didn't go there, we wouldn't be here.
That's why.
So I'm sorry. I don't believe in that. I think that there are tons of lists that list which companies are better for women. Look at Working Women magazine. They list these companies. You can find that. Instead, what I would say is decide what you want and figure out how to get there. That's more important.
And I think the biggest player in this space of tracking is Catalyst. You know, everybody take a look at that. I mean, but holding their feet to the fire with the research. You know, the research is bountiful as to the impact of women in leadership. We have the numbers, and I think it is up to all of us to kind of say, we are going to buy your products, we're not going to buy your products, we are going to work here, we're not going to work here.
We have such a huge voice if you look at all that we buy. And we haven't yet figured out how to use that voice. Even within a company, if you look at all the women in your company, that's a huge collective voice. So you don't have to do it alone. Those who go first better have grit, better have perseverance, better be tough and ready for a fight. And I know, because as a senior partner, somebody asked me to Xerox some stuff, and I didn't do it. I'm not very good at Xeroxing, so I said, I'm not the right person to do this job, but it will happen to those who come first.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you both.
Thank you for doing this.